The University of Pittsburgh has been using taxpayers' funds to perform experiments on aborted children. We can't show the images from those experiments because they're horrible, but we do know that some of the funding for the so-called medical research came from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. That's run by Tony Fauci. David Latta is the pro-life activist helping to uncover this and many other stories, and we're happy to have him with us tonight. David, thanks so much for coming on. Explain this story to us.
Thanks, Tucker. Definitely, and Tucker, I do just want to acknowledge for your viewers that this is a really hard subject to talk about, and this is probably one of the most disturbing studies that I have ever reported on. As you say, you can't show the images on air. You can watch them in the video that's posted at centerformedicalprogress.org. At the University of Pittsburgh, they were doing a study where they were taking the scalps of 5-month-old aborted babies and they were grafting them onto lab rats and lab mice to see how much longer they could keep them growing for. And you can actually see the photographs in the published study of little baby scalps grafted onto the backs of lab rats, growing little baby hairs. Those would have been the little hairs growing on the heads of little infants in Pittsburgh if they hadn't been killed by abortion and then stitched onto lab rats for experimentation. This study was funded by multiple grants from the NIAID office, which is run by Dr. Anthony Fauci. And when I was undercover, Planned Parenthood abortion providers told me that they were the ones who were supplying the aborted baby body parts for experiments at the University of Pittsburgh.
It's one of those stories we almost hesitated to do because it is so grotesque, but it seemed like in the public interest to tell the truth about what's happening. Has Fauci accounted for this?
No, and Dr. Anthony Fauci owns every bit of this study because as the head of, and owns every bit of this issue because as the head of the NIAID office, the buck stops with him in terms of how those grants are spent, whether they're being monitored and made sure that they're ethically and legally and just compliant as far as good stewardship of taxpayer money. The fact that they were using scalps from 5-month-old aborted babies, that means that the heads of those children probably needed to be intact in order to get the scalps, which is an indication that those are either partial birth abortion or even infants delivered alive and whole. Did anybody at Dr. Fauci's office ever ask the researchers at Pittsburgh, hey, how are you getting those scalps? How are you getting whole scalps from the heads of fetuses without a partial birth abortion? I think that Dr. Fauci should be brought in front of the Senate or in front of the United States Congress and ask those questions directly about what his office did to make sure that these grants and that these barbaric experiments were in compliance with all the applicable federal laws and regulations for those federal taxpayer grants.
Very quickly, do you see any hope of that happening, of someone being held to account for this?
You know, I just testified a couple of weeks ago before the Pennsylvania House Health Committee about this. I think that people in the grassroots, I think that everyday Americans are justifiably disturbed and upset and sad and want accountability and want enforcement from their elected representatives, from government officials on these issues, particularly when, I mean, we're talking about a set of government policies with fetal experimentation and experiments on aborted children that basically say that our children are worth more dead than alive, and because of that, it speaks to who we are as a people and who we are as Americans. So I think that we should demand that there be full transparency and accountability on it.
That's right. It's not about choice or reproductive health care. It's just awful, and no country should put up with it for a second. David, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.